After dropping 50 points and knocking down 16 triples in this year's All-Star game, the world was reminded of what Steph Curry is capable of. This has admittedly been a down year for him both shooting and scoring the ball, and to many, he's actually shot himself out of the MVP conversation. But is the dip in his production actually overstated because he's getting compared to himself? Is it the shot making that actually makes him so impactful on the offensive end, or how he leverages that threat into opportunities for his team? And is he still arguably the most valuable player in basketball? When it comes to mastering a specific skill, I'm not sure anyone has ever reached the level that Steph Curry has with his outside shooting. It's gotten to a point where even calling him the greatest shooter of all time feels disrespectful because that means you're even entertaining the discussion. There isn't a spot behind the three-point line where he's uncomfortable. He's just as effective shooting from the corner as he is from the top of the key. And while it's not uncommon for all-time great shooters to be lethal from anywhere around the arc, the rate at which he's able to generate these looks for himself is what sets him apart. He's got a great handle and is very agile, capable of creating separation from his defender in a multitude of different ways, his go-to being the step back. While he sometimes does lose his man entirely with this move, he doesn't really need to create that much space to comfortably get these shots off because of how absurdly quick his release is. This makes it nearly impossible to close the gap once he starts his shot attempt, and because his range extends more than 30 feet out, he's a constant threat to pull up for a jumper whenever the ball is in his hands. Even when he's playing off the ball, he seemingly never stops moving, always hunting for opportunities to get his own shot off, and even the slightest mess up by the defense makes all the difference. Steph's unrivaled combination of both on and off ball self-creation from three, when paired with that ridiculous long-range accuracy, gave him years of numbers that look straight out of a video game. A career of just under 43% from deep on almost 9 attempts a game is unheard of, but this season there has been a very noticeable decline, hitting under 38% of his triples. There's no way of knowing what caused this outlier shooting stretch or whether he'll get back above 40% before the season ends, but what I can say is that because Curry is getting compared to himself, we've started taking this level of production for granted. 12 attempts a game on 38% shooting is still a historically great mark, and his 4.6 made three-pointers a game has only been reached by one other player in all of NBA history, James Harden's outstanding 2019 campaign. While the percentages from outside may be down a bit from the rest of his career, his scoring game is so much more than just being the best shooter ever. Defenders still smother him the moment he crosses half court, and because they play him so high, he usually doesn't have too much trouble beating his man. His in-between game has taken massive strides since entering the league. While he's always displayed the ability to pull up for mid-range jumpers, over these past 2 seasons he's gotten significantly better with his use of the floater. This adds another counter for when rim protectors camp under the basket, and makes it just a bit harder to actually provide help on his drives. These downhill attacks have always been a pretty important facet of his scoring arsenal. He's shown to be a very talented finisher around the rim for years, capable of adjusting his layups to avoid shot blockers, and showing phenomenal touch even with added contact. But, like the shooting, that production in the paint just hasn't been at the same level this season, and because 2 major aspects of his game as a scorer are down, so is his overall output. His true shooting percentage of 59.4 is 3% below his current career average, and a very clear anomaly in comparison to the rest of his prime years. So while Steph's all-time level shot making is a huge factor in what makes him such a special talent, him having this down year actually does bring up an extremely interesting concept: the difference in value between a player's shot making and how the threat of their shot making creates opportunities for their team. Defenses have not changed how they guard Steph at all despite his drop in scoring production, and because of that, he remains the most prominent advantage creator the game has ever seen. As I mentioned before, he seemingly never stops moving without the ball, and room for error to prevent him from getting a shot off is almost non-existent. In most cases, his primary defender is so focused on chasing him around screens and denying the ball that it's the other defender's job to make the read and react accordingly. This leads to a ton of miscommunications, like on this one where Barton is so worried about not letting Steph get the ball in the corner that he leaves a wide open cut to the basket, and there's some confusion after the fact. This time Steph already has some separation from his man as he starts his run to the corner, and all it takes from Iguodala is a simple ball fake on the handoff to leave a wide open lane for the driving dunk. At times he's not even looking to get his own shot off when coming around these screens, just going through the motions as a decoy to free up cutters, which is what makes defending these off-ball actions a nightmare. There's also his constant screening. Because the opposing team doesn't want to leave him unguarded, he's able to just freeze defenses. Normally this would be Lonzo Ball's rotation to stop the dribble drive, but instead he stays attached to Curry in fear of him getting his own look from three, which leads to an easy layup. He's able to get away with extra contact and forward movement when setting these screens because of his smaller stature, which he does exceptionally well to effectively create these downhill openings. His defender is so focused on chasing him as he runs around the court that by the time they realize he's actually going to set a screen for a teammate, it's too late. These surprise back screens break down a defense and force them into a scramble, and because Golden State's roster is filled with so many good decision makers and passers, they most commonly end with high quality looks. It's not just Steph's movement and screening that open up the offense so much though. At times it's him just being on the floor and changing the rules of defense. Here Steph is just standing on the 3-point line during this split action. It should be obvious that once the middle of the paint becomes that wide open, there needs to be some sort of resistance at the nail. This is a pretty standard off-ball rotation, but in fear of Curry's outside shooting, quickly stays glued to him the entire time. Because Steph's ability to generate opportunities as an off-ball creator is such an outlier, this leads to his on-ball playmaking getting somewhat overlooked. He creates a 4-on-3 advantage almost every single time he comes off a screen because of the pull-up shooting threat, and instead of probing with his dribble, he's good at quickly dumping it off to the short roll man. Of course, these plays are significantly more valuable next to arguably the best short roll decision maker of all time in Draymond Green, but sometimes they leave the lane so wide open that it looks like a layup line. Defenses don't always blitz the pick and roll though, and when they elect to hedge instead, Steph is great at keeping his dribble live and attacking the big to force a late recovery. This is most noticeable when running pick and pops with Nemanja Bjelica, giving him all the time in the world to set and fire. His on-ball creation does still have some flaws though. He's sometimes very impatient with his reads and can force some lazy passes, and his vision isn't quite at the level of guys like Luka Doncic and Trae Young. Still though, his ability to constantly generate these advantages when coming off screens, when paired with how he opens up teammates off the ball, makes him one of the very best offensive creators we've ever seen. And because most of this gravity is pulling defenses away from the basket, he creates a large majority of layups and dunks, the highest quality shots in basketball. It's very easy to point out the value of these opportunities when looking at the scoring efficiency of his teammates when he's on the floor versus off. Among all Warriors that have played at least 1,000 minutes this season, only Otto Porter Jr. isn't seeing a decrease in his scoring productivity, and 3 of the other 4 completely plummet. So while Steph himself hasn't been scoring at the level we've become accustomed to, how much is he still affecting his team's offense? Well, the poor shooting stretch really started on December 8th of 2021 against Portland 25 games into the season. And up to that point, the Warriors had a 117 offensive rating with him on the floor and a 106.4 with him off. In the 35 games since then, they've had a 114.9 with him on, as opposed to a 105.6 with him off. Of course, there's been some changes, such as Draymond's injury and integrating Klay Thompson back into the primary rotation, and while the numbers suggest there has been some loss in impact without his legendary shot making, I wouldn't say it's enough to just toss him out of the MVP conversation entirely. Most major catch-all metrics further support this notion, still viewing him as one of the league's best players because so much of his value comes from how he's defended. Some would argue that defensive estimates overstate his overall value, but I would argue that's actually a product of his offense showing up on the other side of the ball. It's not uncommon for a player's impact on one end of the floor to affect their team's play on the other. We see this with Rudy Gobert floor-raising Utah's defensive unit and allowing them to slant towards offense, and we're seeing it with Nikola Jokic right now, whose offense is so unique that surrounding him with athletic, defensive-minded players still yields outstanding results. It's the same with Curry. His style of offense creates so many openings going towards the rim that Golden State can put in defensively slanted lineups and remain very productive. Yet another factor showcasing how valuable of a player he is. At this point in the season, I think it would be hard to argue he's actually been the MVP, but I still think he's in the running. His scoring remains very good, just down for his standards, and he's one of the highest level generators of offense we've ever seen. The Warriors continue to perform extremely well behind his level of play, and if that All-Star Game performance marks the beginning of another 2021-like explosion to end the year, I see no reason why he can't be the most valuable player in the NBA. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out my website, podcast, and social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think of Steph Curry's season so far and where he lands in the MVP conversation. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.